On a planet of 6 billion people, a select few possess a unique genius. Give George Widener any date in history, and he can tell you what day of the week it was.
What day of the week is February 25th, 1993?
1993 is Thursday.
Tommy McHugh was mysteriously awakened in middle life to a talent he never knew he had.
It's hard for me to switch off the brain. I can't switch it off with sleep or rest. It's constantly thinking of ideas and creating.
George and Tommy offer scientists a way into understanding the normally elusive workings of our own brains. Some scientists even believe that there are similar fragments of genius lurking within us all.
I might have a way of tapping into these hidden skills, which I believe must be within us all.
George Widener is on his way to New York's Columbia University to demonstrate his remarkable brain.
My birthday is December 21st, 1975.
1975, that was a Sunday. This year is going to be on Friday.
11th July 1980.
11th July, that was a Friday.
In just seconds, George can calculate the day of the week for an unlimited range of dates.
My birthday, 8th of April, in
8th of April.
5,372.
5,372. It's Wednesday. But you better celebrate it now, because we'll all be dead.
At his home in Asheville, North Carolina, George works into the night, drawing elaborate calendars.
I'm listing all the Mondays for the next 500 years, the next 26,000 Mondays.
Before bed, he reads not a novel, but printed sheets of population figures.
This city is 68,889 people. The odd thing about Asheville is that if you subtract Harvey, Illinois, which is a flat 30,000, which is the only one I've seen like that, then you get the exact population of Burlington, Vermont, 38,889. 2470 and 7074. December 5th, 24,070. That's a Friday.
Numbers follow George wherever he goes.
7074 is a Saturday.
He finds comfort in them.
Saturday. December 5th, 690 AD. It's a Monday.
He considers them his friends.
It feels relaxing. It's like music, you know. Music is, it's like numbers that are happening really, really fast in your head. Came here first time in 1784, Montgomery County established. December 5th, 1791 is today.
George says no one ever taught him how to calculate calendars. In fact, he insists he's not calculating at all.
I don't have no formulas or no kind of thing, but I kind of push and pull inside my head. It feels like more like I'm lining things up. Like if you lined objects up in a row. It feels like that, sort of like I'm just going through and lining them up.
George's skill is phenomenal, but it comes at a cost. He suffers from a form of autism, a brain disorder that leads to awkwardness and social isolation.
I was never a person to be able to socialize in a... I went like 2 months. I remember one time I didn't hardly speak to anybody.
As a child, school was a place of fear and dread. But a chance encounter at his grandmother's house when he was 7 changed his life.
I'm standing in the living room and looking up at this calendar, and just the sort of the magic of the rows of numbers or something, and it was something that was very powerful for me. And then I'd sort of like I found out I could look ahead and I'd sort of know, you know, which day it was, and it was just natural.
Today, George is perhaps the world's greatest calendar calculator, but he is not unique. He belongs to a select group of people known as savants.
What date was the third Saturday in October in 1945?
It was on the 20th.
What day of the week was May 30th in the year 1?
May 30th, the year 1 was on a Wednesday.
This is remarkable, George. You got every one of these right.
Psychologist Darrell Trafford has studied savants for over 40 years.
Savant, by definition, is somebody who has a mental handicap of some sort with what I call an island of genius. And the difference between genius and savants is this disability. Otherwise, we would call them a genius. Now, savant skills come in a sort of a spectrum. There's something called splinter skills, memorizing license plates or sports trivia. Then there's something called talented savants. These are people who have a conspicuous skill that's really quite obvious in relationship to handicap. And then there's a group called prodigious savants. Prodigious savants are people whose skills would be spectacular even if they were to be seen in a normal person. That's a very high threshold to meet, and there's probably fewer than 100 such persons living worldwide at the present time.
The achievements of prodigious savants are all the more remarkable given the handicaps they often carry. Kim Peake is physically and mentally disabled, but he can read 500 pages in an hour and has memorized 9,000 books.
Kim is simply a phenomenal savant. Some people have called him the Mount Everest of memory, and I think he is truly a unique person.
Leslie Lemke is blind and mentally disabled, but he can play back any piece of music after hearing it once.
He knows things that he never learned. He knows things that the musician has spent a lifetime trying to learn, and he came with that knowledge. Now, to me, at least, the prodigious savant comes with knowledge of music, art, mathematics installed. They know things they never learned. And George Widener, certainly, the level of his abilities fits into the category of prodigious savant.
How do prodigious savants like George do what they do? As recently as a decade ago, scientists could only guess. But the latest technology now enables them to probe more deeply. A top neurologist is going to try to discover what regions of George's brain are activated when he does his extraordinary maths.
We're gonna get this show on the road.
Most savants are too disabled to endure a brain scan, but George Widener is prepared to try.
How you doing? Comfortable?
Yeah.
This is a special day for neurologist Joy Hirsch.
Well, this is a very rare opportunity to look at the functional neural circuitry of a very talented individual. We really don't know very much about how special brains are wired.
Hirsch will scan George's brain to see which regions are most active when he performs his unique calculations.
That's about where you're going to be, all right?
She will present him with a new question every 4 seconds. Some he must read on a monitor. Others he must simply listen to through headphones.
What day of the week is May 3rd, 1999?
He's not allowed to move. He has to simply think his answers.
What day of the week is April 15th, 1988?
The experiment lasts an hour.
All right, you can take those earphones off. There. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now just, get up slowly.
Balance back.
When he emerges, George seems to have a bit of a calculating hangover.
I was thinking about Al Capone. On May 4th, they arrested him, they sent him to prison in 1932, and today's the day he died.
Wow. So, George, what I want to do is sort of take you on a tour of your brain. How's that?
Good luck.
Okay, here we
I don't
go.
know.
Here we go. We're interested in understanding the specific parts of your brain that are active when you do this wonderful skill you have.
Incredibly, Hirsch discovers that George's brain, while structurally normal, is mysteriously ablaze with activity in unexpected areas when he's calculating dates. 3 of these areas are normally used to recognize words, shapes, and to initiate movement.
I see activity in the motor areas, and you weren't moving at all in the scanner. You held absolutely still, and yet those parts of the brain were active when you were doing the task, suggesting that they are also engaged.
Why George uses the motor areas of his brain to do his maths is unclear. The map hints that George has an unusually organized brain, but Hirsch needs more proof before she can conclude that he is indeed wired differently.
We don't have comparisons, because if you or I go in the scanner and we try to do these calendar calculations, we simply can't do it.
Since the average person can't do what George can, Hirsch devises a second test that pretty much anyone can do to see exactly where his brain is different. She asks him to name pictures of everyday objects. This time, what Hirsch discovers is extraordinary. These are the language and vision areas of the brain that most people would use to describe everyday objects. Shockingly, George's brain shows no activity in these areas.
Your thinking is run by different machinery. When you're doing the same things that we can do, that is just naming objects, you're using a different neural circuit to do that.
How come I'm using a different part of the brain?
You just have a very special organization. That's what it looks like to me.
If Hirsch's results are any indication, then savants like George do indeed have brains that are wired very differently. But her significant discovery poses a new question. How do the brains of savants become miswired in the first place?
It could be that he was born with this atypical organization, or on the other hand, it could be that it's something that developed over time. And both of those answers need to be subjected to scientific inquiry.
Some believe that savants like George are born with their astonishing skills.
Some people say it isn't that the savant develops new skills or learns new skills, it's that they're released from the tyranny of the left hemisphere.
For Darrell Trefort, the story of how savants emerge begins in utero as the brain's 2 hemispheres battle for supremacy. The hemispheres generally perform different functions. The left is considered dominant in language and logical thinking, the right in art, maths and musical abilities, the domains of savants. In the fetal brain, the right hemisphere will often finish its development ahead of the left. This leaves the left more susceptible to a host of agents that can disrupt brain function. The lead culprit, Trefort believes, is the male hormone testosterone.
In the developing fetus, the level of testosterone reaches the same level as it does in adult males. It's very high.
Trefort believes that in rare cases, this flood of testosterone can interfere with the assembly of the brain's neurocircuitry, resulting in a tangle of miswired connections.
So you have a vulnerable left hemisphere exposed to circulating testosterone. You end up then with left hemisphere damage.
With the left hemisphere compromised, the right compensates. In this way, the savant is freed from the normally dominant logical influence of the left, giving freer rein to the more creative right.
We're sort of a left-brain society. I mean, we do well with logical, sequential thinking and language, and that's the work of the left hemisphere, and it's a marvelous hemisphere. I'm not picking on it, but I'm saying that when there's injury to it, then we see the work of the right hemisphere.
In keeping with this theory, George possesses other unusual abilities associated with the right hemisphere. He is an exceptional artist. He has an enhanced appreciation of detail and a draftsman's ability to record it.
Well, I see geometrical shapes. The bars forming the circle are sort of in a box shape, rectangular shape. and there's a hub inside, and the spindle is like 23 meters. I'm just very fascinated with how the lines radiate out from the center. That feels very strong to me for some reason.
We sent George's drawings to Australia, to a man with a wacky taste in hats, who happens to be the head of the University of Sydney's Centre for the Mind, Professor Alan Snyder.
He's captured the London eye in exquisite photographic realism, actually. It's the attention to detail that's so fascinating. Look at the detail here. I mean, that is an obsessive detail, isn't it? Like a tape recorder or like a photograph, a camera, they record all the details. This is savant-like.
George's literal drawings resembled those that adorned Snyder's office, the works of a little girl named Nadia.
Nadia, a severely autistic girl of 3.5, drew here like Leonardo da Vinci. Astonishing, lifelike perspective where she captures this galloping horse.
Nadia drew horses beautifully, but she was late in developing language. Once she did, she mysteriously lost her drawing talent. Her story led Snyder to suspect that we begin life perceiving the world in an uncomplicated, literal way, but as we grow up, our brains block out this ability as we start to learn more sophisticated concepts like language or reasoning. Snyder thinks that the higher abilities that enable us to navigate life without being overwhelmed by detail come at a cost.
I see it this way. You know, we all take in every little bit of information and we partition it in a certain way to build a concept. And what happens is once that concept is framed, solidified, we are aware of only the big picture and not the parts that make it up. Our brain deliberately inhibits our access to the details that make up the big picture.
Snyder believes that returning the brain to its initial rudimentary state could open creative pathways in anyone.
What intrigued me about this is not so much why or how Nadia did this, but why we all can't do this. And it's not by having better brains, it's by having something less, by having some sort of brain impairment.
But it's not just brain impairment at birth that brings about savant skills. There's powerful evidence that brain damage can trigger the release of hidden talents much later in life.
We began to see a series of cases of people who had these same savant abilities, did not have them before some central nervous system incident, whether it's dementia or a stroke or a baseball to the head. And suddenly, in these people after that, these savant abilities begin to emerge.
One such extraordinary case is Tommy McHugh. Until 5 years ago, this Liverpool builder had never picked up an artist's brush. But ever since a near-fatal brain injury, Tommy has been consumed by a powerful compulsion.
It's an amazing thing that's happened to me. I'm exploding from my head are bubbles of creativity. They're unstoppable. They're like a lava outflow. I can't stop it.
One morning, Tommy was sitting on the toilet when he was rudely interrupted.
There was a banging on the front door, a friend calling, so I forced myself, which is something I didn't do. And at that moment, I could feel like a vein, something filling up, and it went right up my neck. I could feel it going up to my head, and it hit the top of my head and it exploded. Like a bang on your head, and I was vomiting immediately, the sick. blood coming out my nose, eyes and ears.
The first to discover Tommy was his wife, Jan.
He was grey. He was really grey, and he was just lying there. And I said, "You all right, Tom?" And he said, "No." I said, "I'm going to phone an ambulance." And by the time he got to hospital, his eyeballs, the whites of his eyes were red. Obviously, they knew straight away that he'd had a brain hemorrhage.
2 arteries in Tommy's brain had burst, one on either side. His brain began hemorrhaging blood.
When I was in the hospital and they stood at the end of my bed, 3 or 4 people in white coats saying, "You may not make it, you may die, or you could be in a coma, or you could be paralysed, or you could be everything gone wrong with you."
Surgeons worked quickly to save Tommy's life. They inserted a wire coil to plug the leak on the right side of his brain and applied a metal clip to the left to prevent further injury.
When he's had the brain surgery and he went into intensive care, he just didn't recognise me. He didn't know who I was.
I didn't know nothing in my recovery bed. I knew nothing. I got sent home with 98 staples in my noodle doodle. I was sitting on my living room floor peeing into a 4-pint plastic milk bottle. I couldn't walk upstairs. I couldn't eat. I didn't know anything about eating. I was getting spoon-fed porridge by my wife. I knew nothing.
Once he started walking around and things, he had all these emotions he wanted to get out, and he was talking very fast, and he started writing poetry, but that was it, manic. I mean, like that really fast writing.
The more I wrote, the more I wanted to write. It was a drug.
It was like he was possessed by something else, and that's where I get like he was going a bit insane, because it was really frightening.
But Tommy's poetry was just a prelude to his madness to come. Jan was in the kitchen when she got the next shock.
I was cooking and then it turned round in a couple of minutes, like, and it filled the whole page with these tiny, tiny faces. Every face was different. There was like, you know, the alien face that goes like that, but every expression on it was different. And I had the fright of my life, to be honest with you. And then from that moment, it just escalated.
When you see a mouth screaming, I'm screaming for help. These are basically my identities on the canvas. All the images that are protruding through my brain. Picasso does split personalities, split faces. If I knew him when he was alive, I could have said to him, "You got a bit of brain damage there, haven't you, Picasso? You know, you're doing heads like I'm doing, you know." And I reckon I could have a laugh with him.
Tommy's artistic mania has threatened to overtake his surroundings. No one can accuse him of not making the most of the available space. His talent might fall short of Michelangelo's, but he makes up for it with his manic drive. It was this drive that became too much for Jan.
I smelled the house went all smoky one day, and I was downstairs, and I'm very house proud. I like everything nice. And this day there was smoke everywhere. I went up and it was black. There's burning wax candles, and the room was filled with black smoke. He was black, yeah. It just wasn't normal. It was way off normal. And he come down and he said, "You don't know who I am, do you?"
For Jan, it was the last straw.
Even though I felt so guilty for leaving, I had no choice really. At the end of the day, I had to go.
What had happened to Tommy McHugh? Nobody seemed to know. Alone and desperate, he sent off nearly 60 cries for help, written in rhyme, to doctors around the world.
My brain is split in a neuron war, wondering and arguing on what to do, looking for a brain explorer. Is it you? Can you help me link up my brain?
Unknown to Tommy, 3,000 miles away, a Harvard neurologist would understand exactly what he was going through. Alice Flaherty is a leading expert on the effects of brain injury on behaviour. 8 years ago, she herself suffered such a life-changing brain injury.
When I had just finished my residency, I was pregnant with twins, and it was a very complicated pregnancy. And eventually, both twins died right about the time of childbirth. They were premature. And so I was naturally very sad because of that. And I would consider that kind of normal sadness, if that makes any sense. But then about 10 days afterwards, something just clicked. And all of a sudden, everything was different. I remember being in the office here and just being compelled to write everything down. And I was very, very upset. And it wasn't just about my twins' death. It was about everything. And I also felt like it was all slipping away from me and that it was very important, and I had to record it for that reason. And it was so different. It's like the sun and the moon changed places.
Alice believes the traumatic birth of her twins triggered a biochemical change in her brain that resulted in her manic compulsion to write.
What it felt like was, as soon as I had a chance to get away from whatever I was doing, whether it was seeing patients or being with friends at a party, as soon as I could, I would start to write things down. And the things were not meaningful to anybody except me. A lot of it was sort of high school girl diary kind of things, and a lot of it was these very, loose philosophical thoughts. But I had to write, and if I didn't have paper to write, first of all, it was a terrible feeling, but I would just I would pretty much write on anything. I remember writing on paper towels in the public bathroom. I remember writing on I still write on my arm a lot, but I would write on my arm so compulsively that if I was bicycling and I had an idea, once I tried to keep bicycling while I was writing on my arm, that was a bad idea. I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to write stuff down. And that was, I think, when my husband, who was incredibly patient and supportive through all of this, it was these little notes that I would write in the middle of the night, and I would stick them on the wall, and I had like a little glow-in-the-dark pen, and he'd wake up and there'd be all these little sticky notes on the wall, and he'd be like, "Oh no, you really are sick."
Alice had not only found her inner muse, she'd fallen down her very own rabbit hole.
Things just started occasionally just looking different, and this was almost more of a sensory experience, where I remember once bicycling and I was passing some beech trees which had those knots on the bark that looked like eyes, the branch scars. And then all of a sudden they didn't just look like eyes, they really were eyes. And I don't mean they had blue irises and eyelashes, but they were suddenly alive. And it was that sort of animate feeling that would happen a lot. And it wasn't actually scary. It wasn't like a paranoid thing to see these eyes. It was just amazing that these trees, I could see that trees were seeing. I thought it was so great.
Alice turned to psychiatric drugs for help. Eventually, she found the ones that curbed her mania. As word of her experience spread, writers and artists with similar conditions started flocking to her door.
My own experiences changed the kind of patients that I seek out, change the kind of patients that come to see me, and they very much changed the way I talk to patients, and they talk to me as well, I think.
Luckily for Tommy McHugh, one of the dozens of letters he sent off to doctors landed on Alice Flaherty's desk.
The first thing that struck me was that actually he's so exuberant and he's so impassioned about things that most people don't think about. And there's so many exclamation points. I mean, I don't know how best to say it besides that. I have no barriers in front of me to present to people. I know you are the same, Alice. You are in your writing. Happy experiencing writing. I was going to write a rhyme on the full roll of wallpaper. Ha, Alice, me and you get together. They better keep pens, pencils, paint, crayons, paper, bare walls, stones, wood, candles, feathers, bone, sand away. As, the urge to create is like being a heroin addict, given his dope after waiting 6 hours in the rain. Yahoo, all this is underlined. I don't mean Yahoo for the heroin, Yahoo for the art, etc. I think that just about says it all.
I was really fantastically overwhelmed by her reply. She was absolutely spot on. No bull, straight talking, had the experience, and we related immediately.
Alice has long wanted to meet Tommy. She believes she can help him better understand what has happened to his brain. Tommy has a criminal record which prevents him entering the United States. But touched by his letters, Alice is travelling to England for their first ever meeting.
I'd much more want to meet him where he lives, you know, to see the patient in their home environment or anybody. It's very, very different from how they are if they just come into a room and start telling you about themselves.
Oh, God. Lady, Osman, I adore you. God, what was
so great to meet you.
And you, Alice, what was your journey like?
It was good, yeah.
Come in and see the madhouse. Come on, look.
This is so excellent. I'm so happy to be here.
The Sistine ceiling.
This is like way better than the pictures even.
Yeah, well, I've hidden so many things and pictures upstairs, Alice, that you wouldn't...
Or you can just get
it was the only thing that was... It's the only thing that I can put out my brain. If I didn't put them out the brain, they'd be trapped in there, and that'd be a negative...
Build up. And...
They would build up. I'd be a negative, dark-sided man, I imagine. With being able to throw them out on the walls and put everything that comes out, even in writing or poetry or back to front or anything else.
Do you replace stuff, or like do you ever paint over things, or do you just keep expanding?
Keep expanding. I must have changed this horse. I must have changed this horse about 10 times.
So the paint's getting kind of thick, huh?
Yeah, it's building up on the wallpaper, and it's going to be a whirlpool. So either the horse is coming out the whirlpool or going in it. And I don't know how my head got there, but I was thinking, I was thinking about it, you know. I don't get in there.
Is it always your head in all these pictures?
I imagine it's an expression of self-identity where I'm so confused with the numerous images that are rattling around my brain.
To Alice, the full spectacle of Tommy's mania isn't so unfamiliar.
There's like this genre of the doctor comes and it's like, oh, I can relate to that because I too am a little bit like this. And no, I don't know Tommy that well, and I don't want to jump to any conclusions about it, but I look at this and I say, oh, this is really, this makes sense to me.
Sorry about the noise.
The Harvard neurologist finds herself quickly becoming immersed in Tommy's strange world.
Like when I was at my most sort of zippy, you know, and like nutty, that kind of, anything that rotated or had reflections off it, I was totally entranced by that, and I'm still getting a little bit of that, like it immediately sucks me in, and it seems like maybe that happens to you as well.
It does. I get like absorbed in watching them rotate, the different ones. It's the way they spin and wobble.
In anticipation of Alice's visit, Tommy has asked his surgeon for his medical records.
Gone over these with people?
No, I've never seen them before.
Because this is telling us a little bit about what was sort of damaged, I believe not permanently damaged, you know, but early on, the top of your brain, the cortex that's doing calculations and controlling speech and stuff, it looks pretty good. These aren't squeezed shut.
So this is actually the very top of my skull?
Yeah, that's up here, like these...
At the top level, yeah.
Like that if you had a buzzsaw. But down here, things are looking a little blurry, and these are swollen and puffy, so I would guess that some of the symptoms that you had early on were from this squeeze that you had. So the squeeze is because you had this aneurysm that's leaking blood into all these spaces around your brain. It's not like it was all within the brain tissue, but it was sort of pushing on it. And that's what a lot of the symptoms are coming from. The aneurysms are in the perfect location to cause the symptoms that Tommy had. They're in the position to affect where the bleeding would affect the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. And they're right at the base of the brain, a base that's important for motivation and drive.
Alice believes that the bleed from Tommy's aneurysm produced his overwhelming urge to create by putting pressure on two critical areas of his brain. The frontal lobe, which generates ideas, and the temporal lobe, which controls their orderly release into the world. In Tommy's brain, the delicate balance between these two areas has been upset, causing a manic outpouring of ideas.
There's obviously this balance that's unstable now in him, and that kind of instability gives you mood fluctuations, gives you creativity, gives you suffering, and it's unfortunately hard to tease them apart sometimes. Typically when someone has a big burst of output after a tragedy, you know, often people will write a book or poetry or something. Typically it dies away. Tommy is still going strong after 6 years, and I don't think this is ever going to stop. And I'm sure, yeah, the next time I come, there's going to be, well, he'll have moved, but there'll be 3 inches of paint on the wall. And I think that's great too.
For Tommy, his horror story has had a happy ending.
Luckily for me, it unleashed art in my form. I'm glad it unleashed art rather than negative waves and badness. This is beautiful. If I died this minute putting this paintbrush in, I couldn't be more happy. I'm not panicking. I'm not going to go to hell and get the pitchfork at my bottom. I'm going silver surfing in the universe in my brain. That's my heaven.
Tommy McHugh acquired his savant-like ability through a near-fatal trauma. George Widener was born with his. Each illustrates in a different way how brain damage can liberate creative urges or unusual talents normally held in check. Scientist Alan Snyder believes that our increased understanding of the savant brain turns conventional theories about creativity on their head.
It's fascinating to me that music, mathematics, art are considered the pinnacle of human creativity, requiring high intelligence and dedicated practice, focus. But yet, is that true? Savants smash that. And so, if we can get an insight into how they do it, we have an insight into a mind, an insight into creativity. And the question is, why can't we all do it?
Snyder has designed a controversial experiment to see if we can all do it.
We're going to put magnetic pulses into your head. They're safe, and we're going to do that for about 15 minutes.
Using a revolutionary technology, Snyder asserts that he can artificially turn on anyone's hidden potential by temporarily turning off part of their brain.
Our transcranial magnetic stimulating equipment has been able to allow us to have the same skills that savants have.
Snyder has recruited Micah Ray, a university student, to be his guinea pig. He has devised a series of tests that echo savant skills that he will administer to Mike before and after he stimulates his brain. First up is a drawing test.
What we'd like you to do, Mike, is to draw from memory your version of a horse. And horse, and we'll give you about a minute.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you, Mike.
In the next test, Snyder asks his subject to repeatedly read a familiar proverb.
A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
In fact, it's so familiar to Mike, he completely misses the repeated "the."
A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
Finally, Snyder has Mike try to replicate a truly awe-inspiring savant skill.
There's a scene in Rain Man where a box of toothpicks are dropped on the floor, and instantly the savant guesses the number.
180.
Mike has 1.5 seconds to count a mass of projected dots.
160.
It seems an impossible task.
100.
But now Snyder is going to try to unleash his subject's inner savant.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the magnet on your skull, just where we measured before.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it is very possible that you'll feel your teeth clenching together. What I suggest you do is you hold them tight.
Okay.
So, I'm just going to hold your head. Okay, now we're going to do this for 15 minutes. And I want you to try to hold still, don't move. That's why we have the Chin rest. How do you feel?
Feel fine.
But you do feel the clenching.
It actually feels like there's a, like a small pressure blow.
Like a ballpoint point.
Yeah, surprisingly. It's just
ballpoint hammer, some people say.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, the good news is that you're participating in a truly frontier experiment.
Ten seconds.
Is Snyder for real? Will his newly manipulated subject be able to perform the remarkable skills of savants?
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Watching exactly the spot in the brain they're targeting.
For the past 15 minutes, Alan Snyder has been shooting magnetic pulses directly into the brain of his willing subject.
Okay, first of all, Mike, how do you feel?
I feel pretty good, yeah.
Okay, we're going to talk about that more later, but before we do, what I'd like you to do is participate again in the reading of the proverbs that you did before.
A bird in the other hand is worth two in the bush.
The first surprise is that after the stimulation, Mike has instantly spotted the double V.
Everybody sees the two V's, but they somehow don't access it. What the TMS does is what I think exists in a savant all the time, is that it gives you privileged access to lower level, raw sensory information that's obviously in all of us.
Mike's brain now notices the double V because the magnetic stimulation beamed into his left hemisphere has turned off the higher thinking processes located there. This has caused his brain to switch on circuits in the right hemisphere that enable him to see detail more readily.
You can look at the hemispheres as a struggle. There's a kind of tension between them, with the left normally oppressing or suppressing the right. And by inhibiting the left, we disinhibit, we free up the right. Again, I'm going to show you, as before, a number of dots on the screen, and I want you'll just have a moment to look at them, and I want you to tell me how many you see.
Sure.
When he first tried to count the dots, Mike seemed hesitant. But after a dose of magnetic stimulation, his responses are more confident.
103. 110. 62.
Okay, so before the transcranial magnetic stimulation, you got 2 out of 20.
Right.
Which is very typical.
Yeah.
That's about what most people get. But in your case, quite astonishingly, after TMS, you got 8 out of 20, which is better than our average.
Excellent.
And when Mike draws the horse, he seems to do it with a lot more flair.
You seem to have a completely different schema, whereas before you concentrated on the bold outlines.
In each task, Mike exhibits a noticeable improvement, as Snyder has found in 40% of his subjects. The magnet's effects are fleeting. Within an hour, Mike's hidden talents will go back into hiding. But Snyder is not shying away from his ambitions.
I would one day actually like to have a thinking cap. You know, this device that allows us to go against our evolutionary makeup, allows us to become literal, but a better way to say it, allow us to get rid of our prejudices just for a moment.
Should Snyder one day realize his dream, perhaps the question will no longer be whether we can possess the unique abilities of savants, but whether we would want them. How might our lives be affected by enhanced access to detail, limitless memory, or even instant creativity? For now, only people like Tommy McHugh can serve as a guide.
In the future, they're going to have thinking caps that put on your head, They'll trigger a shot to you and you'll be a ballet dancer. They'll trigger another shot, you'll be a musician. They'll find areas on the brain that can trigger things on you.
Snyder's work may be a step towards this future, but his efforts to replicate the skills of savants are in their infancy. The brain is an infinitely complex organ, one that does not readily surrender its secrets. But understanding the savant brain may offer the best way forward.
Until we can explain the savant, I don't think we can explain ourselves. We can't just, at least I can't, just leave it as an outlier out there and say, oh my goodness, look at that, isn't that interesting? And then come back and look at the central nervous system in the traditional kind of way. Because no model of brain function is going to be complete until we can fully account for the savant.
So for the moment, the marvelous skills of George Widener must remain a source of wonder, not only for the scientists exploring his brain, but for the collectors lining up to buy his work.
I can do numbers in my head and stuff, and so I put them into artwork, in a way that I try to be creative with it and stuff.
His drawings of calendars are selling for thousands of dollars, something he never could have dreamed of.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing?
So nice to see you.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Your colors are just spectacular.
Oh, thank you.
Do you spend time on your colors? How are you inspired to do your colors?
I just do them.
They're just beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. That's your brilliant brain.
That's my brilliant brain.
It's your brilliant brain.